The morning sun cast long shadows across the Utah mountains, filtering through tall pines to reach the gathering below. In a private cemetery overlooking the valley Robert Redford had called home for decades, hundreds stood in reverent silence. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and earth, as if nature itself had come to pay its respects. Friends, family, and admirers formed a sea of black against the autumn landscape, their faces etched with the particular grief that comes from losing someone who seemed larger than life itself. The service had been proceeding with quiet dignity. A minister spoke of legacy and light, of stories told and lives touched. Then, cutting through the solemnity like a knife through silk, came movement from the front row. A golden retriever, coat gleaming despite the somber occasion, suddenly pulled free from its handler. The collective intake of breath was audible as the dog bounded forward, its paws hitting the ground with purpose and determination. What happened next would be etched into the memories of everyone present. The dog didn't simply approach the casket, it leaped onto it with surprising grace, settling its body against the polished wood as if trying to embrace what lay within. Time seemed to stop. No one moved. No one spoke. The scene held a power that transcended the ordinary boundaries of a funeral service. This wasn't merely disruption. It was communion. A farewell that needed no words, no eulogy, no carefully crafted remembrance. In that extraordinary moment, everyone present understood they were witnessing something profound, a testament to love that existed beyond human comprehension, beyond the limits of language itself. Robert Redford's life had been a masterwork of American cinema and conscience. From his breakthrough in Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid to his Oscar-winning directorial debut with Ordinary People, he had shaped not just films, but the very culture of storytelling itself. Yet his influence extended far beyond the silver screen. As founder of the Sundance Film Festival, he had championed independent voices for decades, giving platform to stories that might never have been told. His environmental activism had protected countless acres of wilderness. His political engagement had challenged administrations and inspired movements. The funeral setting reflected the man perfectly. Nestled in the Wasatch Mountains of Utah, the location spoke to Redford's lifelong romance with the American West. This wasn't Hollywood glamour. It was authentic, rugged beauty. The cemetery sat on land he had personally helped preserve, surrounded by aspens, whose golden leaves whispered in the breeze. He had chosen this place years ago, telling friends he wanted to rest where he could still hear the mountains talking. The assembled crowd represented every facet of his remarkable journey. Directors who had worked with him stood alongside ranchers who had been his neighbors. Environmental activists mingled with studio executives. Native American leaders, whose causes he had championed, stood beside young filmmakers whose careers he had launched. Each person carried their own piece of the Redford story. Memories of generosity, moments of inspiration, instances where his quiet influence had changed the trajectory of their lives. But perhaps most telling was how Redford had lived his final years. Retreating increasingly from public life, he had found solace in simple pleasures. Morning rides through canyon trails, evenings spent painting in his studio, capturing the changing light on mountain faces, long walks through forests he had fought to protect, and always, accompanied by the constant presence of his four-legged companion. Those who visited him during this period remarked on the change, not a diminishment, but a distillation. He had become more essentially himself, stripped of Hollywood artifice, grounded in the earth he loved. His relationship with nature had always been central to his identity. While other stars collected cars or art, Redford collected moments of wilderness. He spoke often of how animals understood things humans had forgotten. Presence, loyalty, the ability to exist without pretense. This philosophy had infused his work, from the horses in The Horse Whisperer to the wilderness of Jeremiah Johnson. It was no surprise, then, that in his final chapter, his closest companion wasn't human at all. The golden retriever had come into Redford's life 5 years earlier, a rescue from a local shelter that seemed to recognize him instantly as home. Redford had named him Scout, after the narrator in To Kill a Mockingbird, a story about seeing the world with innocent eyes and fierce loyalty. From their first meeting, the bond was unmistakable. Staff at the shelter later said they'd never seen anything like it. The dog had walked directly to Redford, sat at his feet, and refused to move, as if declaring, "This one, this is my person." In the years that followed, Scout became Redford's shadow. Visitors to the ranch would find them together always, Scout lying beneath Redford's desk as he worked on scripts, padding alongside him through art galleries in town, curled at his feet during long evenings on the porch. The dog had an uncanny ability to sense his moods. During difficult days when age and loss weighed heavy, Scout would rest his head on Redford's knee, offering silent comfort. On good days, they would venture deep into the backcountry, Redford still spry enough to keep pace with his younger companion. Those close to Redford noticed how Scout seemed to understand the rhythms of his life. The dog would appear at the door precisely when Redford typically took his walks. He would settle in the studio when painting sessions began, never disturbing the creative process but always present, a warm reassurance in the corner of the room. During Redford's final illness, Scout's devotion only intensified. Nurses reported that the dog refused to leave the bedside, accepting food only when brought to him, maintaining a vigil that touched everyone who witnessed it. Friends saw in this relationship a reflection of Redford's essential character. Here was a man who could have had anything, anyone, yet found his deepest comfort in the uncomplicated loyalty of a rescue dog. It spoke to his values: authenticity over artifice, genuine connection over superficial admiration. Scout represented everything Redford treasured: unpretentious companionship, wordless understanding, love without conditions or complications. The funeral service had been proceeding with careful orchestration. The minister, an old friend of Redford's, spoke of light and shadow, of stories that outlive their tellers. Musicians played gentle acoustic pieces that echoed through the mountain air. Family members had shared remembrances that balanced tears with laughter, painting a portrait of a man who was both icon and father, legend and neighbor. Scout had been positioned in the front row, held gently by one of Redford's daughters, his golden head turning occasionally as if searching for someone who wasn't there. As the minister began the final prayer, Scout's restlessness grew visible, his muscles tensed, his breathing quickened. Those nearby noticed, but attributed it to the emotion of the moment. Surely animals could sense the grief that saturated the air. But this was something more, something deeper. With a sudden burst of energy that surprised everyone, Scout pulled free from his handler's grip. For a moment, there was confusion. Should someone stop him? But instinct, or perhaps respect for grief's unpredictable expressions, held everyone in place. The dog moved with purpose, not frantic but determined. He circled the casket once, as if confirming what his senses already knew. Then, with an athleticism that belied his years, Scout leaped. It wasn't a desperate scramble, but a measured jump, landing with surprising gentleness on the casket's surface. What followed was a sight that would remain burned into the memory of every witness. Scout didn't bark or whine. Instead, he lay down carefully, arranging his body along the length of the casket, his head coming to rest exactly where Redford's would be inside. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to pause. The minister's words died on his lips. Mothers pulled their children closer, not in fear, but in recognition of witnessing something sacred. Scout's breathing was the only sound, deep, measured breaths that seemed to echo the rhythm of meditation or prayer. His eyes closed, and he pressed his body against the wood as if trying to pass through it, to reach the friend who lay beyond. Some would later swear they heard Scout make a sound, not quite a whimper, more like a sigh that carried the weight of all the walks they would never take, all the quiet evenings that would never come. Others said the dog's tail moved slightly, not a wag, but a gentle sweep, as if acknowledging some presence invisible to human eyes. The moment stretched, elastic with meaning, holding everyone in its spell. No one moved to remove Scout. It felt like sacrilege to disturb what was unfolding. The dog remained there for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes, his body rising and falling with each breath, a living testament to love that transcended death. When he finally stirred, it was to place one paw gently on the casket's surface, a gesture so deliberately tender that several people audibly wept. Then, with the same dignity with which he had arrived, Scout stepped down and returned to his place, settling at the feet of Redford's daughter as if his duty had been completed. The immediate aftermath was a collision of emotions. Redford's children, who had maintained composure throughout the service, found themselves undone by Scout's gesture. His eldest son would later describe it as the moment that made it real. Not the careful words or planned tributes, but the raw, unscripted grief of a dog who had lost his world. Tears flowed freely, but there was something else too. A strange comfort in witnessing such pure expression of loss. It was as if Scout had given voice to what everyone felt, but couldn't adequately express. Among the Hollywood contingent, there was amazed recognition that they had witnessed something more powerful than any scripted scene. One director whispered to another that it was pure Redford, unexpected, authentic, and impossibly moving. An actress who had worked with him on multiple films said later that it felt like watching one of his movies come to life, where the most profound truths were told without words, in glances and gestures and the spaces between breaths. The moment would inspire countless retellings, each adding to the mythology of a man who had always been larger than life. Within hours, the story had escaped the confines of the private service. Despite requests for privacy, someone had captured a photo. Scout lying on the casket, a single image that would soon circle the globe. Media outlets picked it up with headlines that ranged from reverent to sensational. The goodbye that stunned Hollywood, a dog's love, the most moving moment at Redford's farewell, beyond words, when loyalty transcends death. The image became instantly iconic, shared millions of times, each share accompanied by personal stories of the bonds between humans and their animal companions. Animal behavior experts weighed in, offering various interpretations. Some spoke of dogs' ability to sense chemical changes associated with death, their recognition of the absence of familiar scents and sounds. Others pointed to documented cases of animal grieving rituals, the ways creatures across species acknowledge and mourn their losses. But even the most scientific explanations couldn't fully capture what had occurred. There was something in Scout's deliberate actions, his careful positioning, his gentle breathing against the casket, that suggested awareness beyond instinct. It hinted at understanding, at conscious farewell, at love that knew exactly what it had lost. The profound impact of Scout's gesture rippled far beyond that mountain cemetery. In the days and weeks that followed, people found themselves returning to the image, to the story, trying to understand why it moved them so deeply. It wasn't simply about a dog missing his owner. It was about the nature of love itself, stripped of pretense and performance. In an age of carefully curated social media tributes and performative grief, Scout's act was bracingly real. It couldn't be faked, couldn't be scripted, couldn't be anything other than what it was. Pure, devastating loss made visible. The moment also seemed to crystallize something essential about Redford's legacy. Throughout his career, he had championed authenticity over artifice. His best performances were marked by what he didn't say, by the emotions that played across his face in silence. His directorial work consistently explored the spaces between people, the connections that transcend language. Scout's farewell was perhaps the ultimate expression of these themes, a communication beyond words, a truth that needed no translation. It was as if the universe had provided the perfect final scene for a life lived in pursuit of genuine human and non-human connection. Cultural anthropologists noted how Scout's act fit into ancient traditions across cultures. Dogs as psychopomps, guides for souls transitioning between worlds. The faithful hound who waits at the grave. The companion who refuses to accept death's finality. These stories appear in every civilization, suggesting something universal about the bond between human and canine, something that transcends cultural boundaries and speaks to shared experience. Scout had unconsciously enacted a ritual as old as domestication itself, reminding everyone present of continuities that persist despite modernity's attempts to sanitize death. For those who had known Redford personally, Scout's gesture revealed another layer of meaning. It spoke to the private man behind the public figure, someone who had found, in his relationship with this dog, a simplicity and truth that fame had often complicated. The fact that his most genuine mourner was not a famous colleague or prestigious institution, but a rescued dog, said everything about Redford's true values. He had spent his life telling stories about authenticity, and in death, he received the most authentic farewell possible. The moment also raised profound questions about consciousness and connection. What did Scout understand? What did he feel? Was his gesture instinct or intention? These questions had no definitive answers, but perhaps that was the point. In a world that demanded explanation for everything, Scout's act remained beautifully inexplicable. It existed in the realm of mystery, of faith, of things felt but never fully understood. It reminded people that the most important truths often can't be proven or measured, only experienced and believed. In the end, Scout's leap onto the casket became inseparable from Robert Redford's legacy itself. Museums would include the photograph in retrospectives of his life. Documentaries would feature the moment as their emotional crescendo. But more importantly, it became a story people told each other about love and loyalty, about the connections that matter most. It joined the canon of Redford's greatest scenes, not from any film, but from life itself. The perfect, unscripted conclusion to a story about staying true. The image of Scout on the casket would inspire countless acts of kindness toward animals, adoption drives in Redford's name, and renewed appreciation for the creatures who share our lives. But its deepest impact was more subtle. A reminder that in our final moments, we are measured not by our achievements or accolades, but by the love we've earned, the loyalty we've inspired. Robert Redford had won Oscars, built institutions, changed cinema, but at his funeral, he was honored most profoundly by a dog who simply couldn't bear to let him go without saying goodbye. It was perhaps the most honest review of a life ever given, wordless, sincere, and absolutely true.